What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode here, the Side Guys Football Forum. I'm one of your co-hosts on the side, joined as always by my good friend, my good buddy, the other half of the guys with the Tad the Side. And Tad, we're doing an episode I don't think we did in last year's series of fantasy, episodes leading up to the season. And we're doing an IDP episode. So for those
I
of
don't
you who are
think
not
we've
familiar,
ever done that.
I don't think we've ever done it. Yeah, but I know especially when we made the switch to start doing fantasy-centric episodes before, obviously, the season began and obviously in season. I don't think we've ever covered IDP before.
Look
but
at
yeah, for
us,
those of you
300 episodes in and we're still doing new stuff. Keeping the marriage alive.
still coming up things new. Yeah, exactly. Coming up with new things all the time here. But yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with what IDP is individual defensive players. And so yeah, as opposed to picking up a whole team defense, you actually draft individual players at the defensive position. And that's how you sort of build your defensive roster there. So it's not a very common setting in a lot of fantasy leagues, but we'll get into all of that as soon as we do our favorite plug with our favorite sponsor. That's our Underdog Fantasy, because I mean, they remain a great sponsor with us. They are just a very easy way to get into sports betting as well as fantasy football. They do a version of fantasy football called Best Ball, where you literally just set a roster, you draft it, and you don't have to make any more transactions for the rest of the year. There's no trades, no waiver wire, no nothing like that. Literally, the roster that you draft, you are set for the entire way. So it can either work in your favor or work against you, where it's like if you had Aaron Rodgers in Best Ball last year, you were kind of screwed. So it's like you can already get the pros and the cons with it. It's nice that you don't have to manage it each and every week. But I think the best thing that Underdog Fantasy is good for is the sports betting aspect, Tad. So I think me and you both are big proponents of using that betting aspect of it. You make anywhere between 2 and 8 different prop bet picks across whatever sports you're comfortable with. You can bet on the upcoming NFL season, the upcoming college football season. You can bet on the Olympics going on right now. There's a lot of Olympic related bets you can make. The MLB season is coming up to wrapping up the regular season. It's close to the playoffs. You can bet on the MLB playoffs as well. The WNBA season is on hiatus right now because the Olympics, but then that will pick up again. So you can bet on that again. So whatever you're comfortable with, you make anywhere between, like I said, 2 and 8 different prop bet picks. The more picks you make, the more potential money you can win. And with that, guys, Underdog Fantasy has shared a promo code that we're going to share with you guys. That promo code is DESAI, DESAI. Double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500, courtesy of our good friends at Underdog Fantasy. So, I mean, yeah, we're talking about money here. So, I mean, yeah, if you were to bet that hypothetically with that $500 on your first deposit using our promo code, you could get that match dollar for dollar. And on Underdog Fantasy, you could bet with up to $1,000 on their betting platform. You can use the website. You can use the apps, both Android and Apple devices. It's a very intuitive app as well as the website, like I said. So whatever you're comfortable with. But guys, get in the action because, yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of things you can be betting on. A lot of money you could be potentially winning there. Use that promo code once again. That promo code is DESAI, DESAI. Double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500, courtesy of our good friends at Underdog Fantasy.
Yeah, I need to shout out a friend of the show, Max. My friend Matt made a great joke the other day. We were talking about actually Underdog's about to be back because actually they just partnered with Bill Belichick. I don't know if you saw that. Bill Belichick just partnered with Underdog. So we were talking about that. And Matt goes, I can't wait till I'm invested in Marquez Valdez-Scantling over under 2.5 catches.
That's exactly what could happen. Yeah, once you get to the season and you try to make some money there, yeah, that's exactly some of the bets you could be making with our good friends at Underdog Fantasy. So, let's get to the episode here because, yeah, like I said, this is something that we haven't really done in previous podcast episodes where we're talking about fantasy football. So I already talked about a little bit about what IDP is. That's individual defensive players. And so, yeah, you're drafting the actual defensive players as opposed to just a team defense. So instead of picking the Baltimore Ravens as your fantasy defense, you're picking the players from that defense. So you're picking a Kyle Hamilton. You're picking a Roquan Smith. I mean, those are the guys you're actually drafting to your roster to be fantasy producers for your roster. And so that's the nice thing, is that, you can pick your individual players from certain teams, very similar to the way that you're picking out your offensive roster. So, I mean, yeah, it's sort of a little bit of that sort of finite customization that you would want. Some people do it, not everybody do it. It's not a very standard roster setting with a lot of these fantasy leagues. So, Tad, I think I've asked you this before, but I'll ask you this here right now anyways. Do you play in any IDP leagues, or have you played in one before?
I did one for 2 years with a high school friend of mine, who I guess I'm slightly betraying a source anytime during the draft process when I'm like, a source tells me, he's my source, because he is currently, I won't say what team, but he's currently involved in college football.
There you go.
So yeah, he's a football junkie. So he's like, we gotta give this a shot. I was like, okay. So I gave it, 2 years. It's not my cup of tea personally, because like handling a team is already stressful enough without adding on 6 more players. And plus, and we'll get into this, the waiver wire with IDP is crazy. Like, it is truly like, that saying, leagues are one in the waiver wire. IDP leagues are vastly one on the waiver wire. So I do have 2 years of, I feel like I'm in a job interview. I do have 2 years of experience in IDP. I also am very proficient in Microsoft Excel. And it's,
are you though?
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all. It drives my sister, who has a major in business, absolutely crazy. She's like, you didn't know you could do like this with the column? I'm like, oh, that's so cool. It's gonna be interesting. But no, IDPs are a lot of fun if you do it correctly. Is kind of where I landed on it. And now that I'm an adult, I don't with a job. I just don't have enough time to do it in IDP.
That's fair. That's fair. I actually have a lot of experience with IDP. So when I first started getting into fantasy
you do
football,
a lot of weird leagues like that. I never heard
that's
of a
specifically
vampire
what I
league
like about
until
fantasy
I
football.
met
Is just
you.
like you could do so many different settings, and there's so many different ways that you can play fantasy football. So it's like that's whenever I join up with so many leagues, it's because they're all different. So it's like I don't want to play the same league in 4 different leagues. It's like I like the sort of variety aspect of that. But I don't think I've ever told you this, but when I got into fantasy football back in high school, I played in a very shallow league. So, I mean, it was literally 6 of us. And we had these massive rosters. So we were starting like 3 quarterbacks, like 4 running backs, like 4 receivers, like because you're only playing with 6 people.
You guys get up to like 1,000 points a game? Like, my God.
They were pretty high scoring games for sure, but just like the whole point was because there's so few league members in it, you had to increase the number of positions. Otherwise, everybody's going to have a stacked team. So I think this is the way that we sort of did that. But with that, we did IDP. So we had defensive line players, and we had linebackers, and we had defensive backs and all that. So when I first got into fantasy football, that was the way that I was already playing. So it wasn't anything new to me when people started to get more into it. Now, I still do play in 2 leagues with IDP in it, so it's something that I have big familiarity with. But yeah, if you're interested in IDP, I think me and Tad are sort of going to just break down a little bit of what IDP is and just some of the differences and maybe some strategies in case you decide you want to join an IDP league or your league is considering going to an IDP format as opposed to a defensive format. So as mentioned, IDP stands for individual defensive player, but the thing is that you have to pay attention. It's the same thing with your offensive roster too. It's like you have to pay attention to your roster settings because with IDP, you can either set it as like it's a flex position, so you can start any defensive player. You just have like
I've not seen that before.
3 to 5 different IDP players. So you could pick like all defensive linemen. You can mix and match whatever you're comfortable. You can do it that way. Or you could sort of typecast it. So it's like you have to draft 2 defensive linemen. You have to draft 2 linebackers. You have to draft 2 defensive backs, whatever the roster is there. But then also within that, Tad, I don't know if you know this, but with defensive line, some leagues also separate it where it's like you could draft defensive end or a defensive tackle. So you have that delineation as well. Not just defensive lineman, but you have to draft a DT as well as a DE. So it's like that's a delineation. And also the same thing with the defensive back position. You can set it where it's like you draft a cornerback as well as a safety. So it's like, yeah, you can get very customized with IDP. Most people just do the standard defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back. So you can sort of mix and match that way. But yeah, if you want to go fully into it, you can even separate it out by those like within the defensive line position. You can separate it out that way too. So most of the leagues I play with just that standard defensive line, linebacker, defensive back. Scoring works the same way as offensive players. So, I mean, whatever they do on the field, that's the scoring that you'll get as far as fantasy points are concerned. The most common metrics that you see for defensive scoring is you see sacks. Obviously, you generally get a good amount of points for sacks. Forced fumbles, you get some good points there. Tackles is the big one. That's the big one that we'll get into a little bit later here. Interceptions. And, of course, if you score a defensive touchdown, you get points for that too. So, Tad, I sort of brought up tackles here, but it's just like when you're looking at IDP players, especially like, with your experience that you have too, I feel like tackles is the most critical stat that you want to be looking at for all positions. Because what do all defensive players do? They all have to tackle, where it's like interceptions is a little bit more fluid. Same thing with sacks. That's a little bit more fluid, but tackles is the one thing you can rely on with every defensive position.
Yeah, I compare. So, Amar, just to show how well you know me at this point, what's the most valuable stat I have for receivers in fantasy football?
Well, it's volume.
Yeah, volume, targets, same thing. Yeah. Tackles are the targets of defense. Like that's basically the only stat I'm looking at. Not even just with linebackers, but with corners. But we'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, so let me just because this list kind of surprised me. So I actually looked at the top 10 finishing linebackers last season. It was, God help me, Foye Oluokun.
You got it pretty close. Foye Oluokun, yeah.
That's what he said. That wasn't close. That's what he said.
Sounded a little different what I heard.
Yeah, well, there was no question mark at the end of yours.
Considering the name, yeah, you did very well.
Well, I will say this. I'm cheating a bit because, fun fact, he went to high school just down the street from me.
Nice.
He and I were in high school at the same time. And
you know where he went to college?
Oh, God. Did he go to Penn State?
I'll give you a hint. It was an Ivy League.
Oh, that's right. He went to Yale. That's why I was messing up. Yeah, I was getting the blue and white. I remember the blue and white. So Foye was the top finishing linebacker. And then it was TJ Watt. And then Bobby Okereke, which I only know because he was a former Colt. Then Bobby Wagner, which actually kind of surprised me. I believe it's Terrell. I don't know if it's Terrell or Terrell. This is T.O. all over again. Terrell Bernard, Khalil Mack.
Yeah, Terrell Bernard, yeah.
Okay. Quincy Williams, T.J. Edwards, Alex Singleton, and my boy Zaire Franklin. There are really only like 2 or 3 superstars in that list. Like, obviously, TJ Watt, I guess you could argue Khalil Mack is still a superstar if he's deserving of that. That's a whole separate other podcast conversation. But otherwise, none of those guys, if you're a casual football fan, really jumps out at you of like, oh, yeah, he's really good. Now, if you follow football like we do, I know TJ Edwards is really good. You know TJ Edwards is really good. If I walked outside on the street right now in my apartment complex and asked someone, hey, who's TJ Edwards? I promise you most people would be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, like, that's what I mean is and that's kind of the thing with IDP in general, and you'll see this later on, is the bigger names actually tend not to be the best guys to go for. You want to go for the guys who you don't really see like on SportsCenter, but you do see on every play. So, because again, those were the top 10 finishers in linebackers, and linebackers, pretty much the quarterback of IDP. Like, they're going to rack up the most because obviously they have the most potential for interception. Like, a corner is really only going to get you how often does a corner get a forced fumble? But, a linebacker can get you a sack, forced fumble, interception, any of those. So they're the quarterback of IDP leagues. And yeah, it's just, you got to look at those tackle numbers. And again, that's why the waiver wire is so important in IDP, is because your pool is so much bigger, right? How many receivers really blow up out of nowhere a year? 2, maybe 3, if that. Linebackers, I mean, I should have done research on that. I would be willing to bet the turnover of top 10 linebackers is very similar to the turnover of top 10 tight ends, where it's like almost completely new every year.
It's close to it. And I will say that with all the players that you listed out, like, I mean, I said this earlier, but just like, pay attention to your scoring and league settings, because that scoring can fluctuate. Because maybe in one league it's like you only get a tackle per point, 1 point per tackle. Maybe in another league it's only half of that. Maybe in a different league it's like you get a forced fumble that's 5 points as opposed to only 2 points in different leagues. So that affects the scoring as well. Now, all the names that Tad listed out, like, I mean, that makes a ton of sense when it comes to linebacker for sure. But like, your individual strategy for defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back is a little varied as well, because with defensive line, you want to target those higher named players. Like, you want to get an Aiden Hutchinson, you want to get a JJ Watt, you want to get a Max Crosby. Those are the guys that are going to score you the most points.
Well, you don't want to get a JJ Watt anymore. You get JJ Watt, you're going to lose that league.
That's for sure. But I talk about like in the past, but obviously now you go with TJ Watt for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, with linebackers, I completely agree with you, Tad, where it's like you want to target that tackle number. So it's like, even with teams that you don't think are going to be overall all that
Sometimes
crazy
those are the
NFL,
best.
that's where you can rack up the most points, exactly, at the linebacker position, because they're going to be on the field more, so they're going to rack up more potential numbers. So, yeah, you may see a lot more linebacker tackle numbers because they're on a poorer team. And then, yeah, same thing with defensive back. I know you may want to target cornerbacks because of the potential of interceptions, but the better idea is to actually go with safeties because they're the ones that will sometimes bring you into the box to stop the run that way. And then also they're the last effort in case a receiver breaks open. They could get that tackle for you at the end. So that's sort of a little bit of an individual strategy per position. And then here's the key thing, Tad. Always pay attention to what a player is labeled in your fantasy league. What I mean by that is that in some leagues, TJ Watt may be labeled a defensive end, but in other leagues, he may be labeled a linebacker. If you're lucky in a different league, he'll be labeled as both, so you can sort of have that fluidity there. But that can be a critical factor when you're building out your strategy as far as like, oh, I'll draft TJ Watt as my linebacker, and I'll draft Max Crosby as my defensive end. But then it's like, oh, wait, TJ Watt's a defensive end, and you only have one defensive end spot. Now you're kind of screwed and you have to figure out your strategy. So pay attention to that. That's very critical depending on the league that you play in. Pay attention to what position your player is assigned to because, yeah, it could fluctuate.
We'll touch on that in a bit because there's a name coming up that really surprised me at how low he was, and solely because of exactly what you're talking about. Before we do, I actually disagree with you. I don't think you prioritize safety over corner, but again, this is where IDP stuff comes in because it's not bad strategy. I'm not saying your strategy is bad. I just think there's a better one, mine. And I think that it's
a guy with 2 years experience.
You don't need to shake your head so vigorously. Far too much vigor in that. I actually like going for corners because they have more tackle opportunities. But, and here's the mistake I made in my first year of IDP, and I will admit I got killed because here's what I did is I drafted all these good corners. It was, and this is going to date me, it was around when Revis Island was first becoming a thing. And I got Darrell, is it Darrell, right?
Darrell Revis, yeah.
Darrell Revis. So I got Revis and I was really excited. I couldn't believe he slipped in the draft. I was like, oh my God. And I very quickly learned why he slipped in the draft. And this is a very common rookie mistake. Don't go for the big name corners. Don't do it. Because the whole reason they're big name corners, they earned it, is they don't get thrown to a lot.
Throw that way, yeah, exactly.
So they get like 2 tackles a game and get you like 3 points maybe. And you're like, what happened? And it's because they shut down the receiver, especially Revis. Like there's that famous stat where he held, like Larry Fitzgerald, Andre Johnson, Steve Smith, and like he went like 5.
Yeah, they put all the receivers in a season that he faced.
And they only had like a combined like 30 catches or something like that. And so you actually want to avoid the big name corners. Now, that rule doesn't exactly apply to big name safeties because that's different. Big name safeties are big name safeties, maybe because they're an Ed Reed where they do get the tackles and they kind of murder people with those tackles. See, I can make that joke with Ed Reed, not with Ray Lewis. So you look at the top 3 finishers for corners last year. It was Kenny Moore, Mike Hilton, and Deron Bland. Bland's a little bit of an outlier because he had like a gajillion pick sixes. But Kenny Moore and Mike Hilton, both very good corners. I'm not going to say they're bad or they're, holes in the defense at all. I don't think anyone would consider them like top tier, CB1s in the NFL. But that's what I mean is you kind of go for it. It's almost counterintuitive. For your top tier in fantasy football, you go for the mid tier. That's actually on the field. That's where your sweet spot is. And that is a very common mistake I see that a lot of IDP players make is like, oh, I got who's a good corner? Is Jalen Ramsey still here? Is he still hanging around? I got Jalen Ramsey. Okay, you don't really want to do that because Jalen Ramsey, there may be one game where he gets 10 points because he got a pick, but for the most part, he's actually going to be an anchor on your defense. So avoid big name corners. Now, big name linebackers, we'll get to that in a bit because that depends on usage. And that's another thing too, is you're saying, look at your league settings. That's also very true, but also pay attention to how the teams use them. But we'll touch on that in a bit.
For sure. Now, obviously, if you're playing in an IDP league, you have to draft both offensive players as well as defensive players. So probably a common question that you're asking is just like, when do I start drafting defensive players? Now, here's a big stat for you, Tad. In one of my leagues that I played in last year, 90 offensive players scored more points than the highest defensive player in my league. So that kind of tells me that it's like I need to prioritize my offensive roster a little bit more than figuring out my defensive roster. And then just like you said earlier, where it's like your waiver wire is a lot deeper because you're only drafting about 3, maybe 6 different defensive players for your roster across the different positions, right? So you have that much more variety on the waiver wire. And then, like you said, there's so much more potential for a defensive player to all of a sudden come out of nowhere and become a known name in the IDP community. It's like, I need to pick up this guy. So it's like, you want to target your fantasy offensive players first. So I probably wouldn't start targeting my defensive players until probably around 6 or 7. So I know that's probably like you want to draft your first 5 guys at least. Then maybe that 6 or 7 round, if you want to target like a Myles Garrett or a TJ Watt or something like that, I can understand that. But if you wait a little longer, it wouldn't surprise me either. But once again, I can't stress this enough. Pay attention to your roster settings, because if you only have a certain amount of offensive players that you have to fill, then maybe you want to pick defensive player a little bit earlier. But it's like, if you have a deep offensive roster plus a bench, then defensive players can wait a little bit longer. But yeah, once again, like I said, can't stress that enough. Pay attention to your roster settings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say round 6 or 7 because oftentimes, actually, I think all the time, drafts are expanded in IDP drafts, of course. So I'm just gonna say, yeah, like last 5 to 7 rounds, that's when you should start targeting. But what to add on to what you're saying, because you're absolutely right, is like the waiver wire is more valuable there. So like, if you have a superstar, if a TJ Watt is out there, if I'm trying to think, honestly, in this again, that mid, well, he's not mid tier, but the name that you usually wouldn't associate with, like, oh, that's a guy I gotta get, Matt Milano with the Buffalo Bills. He is super valuable in IDP leagues. Go for it. Yeah, that makes sense. But to add on the waiver wire thing, rookies, the rookie adjustment for defensive rookies is far less severe than it is. I am very wary of drafting rookie receivers because they tend to adjust much slower. That is slowly, I feel like that's slowly getting phased out. A little bit, but it's still kind of there where, and we kind of talked about the last episode, 2 episodes ago, where rookies kind of go through a roller coaster. Either they start really hot and then they kind of fall, or they start really bad and then they rise. You don't really get that with a rookie linebacker. So actually, it was funny. We're going to get into this in a bit for sleepers and busts. I almost made Leatu Latu my sleeper D lineman pick, but
I wouldn't be surprised if you did pick that. I would have liked it.
I was so close to it, but I just don't quite know because I've been burned so often by Colts DNs. That's but fair. But Latu has real potential, and I don't think he's going to get drafted in a whole lot of leagues.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, like, with rookies, you just don't know how it's going to go. And so, like, you're waiting for that to possible blow up, and then you'll add them on the waiver wire. So, yeah, that's sort of a brief sort of overview as far as IDP strategy. But I mean, guys, if you're playing in an IDP league and you need some more advice, like, I mean, you see the ticker coming right down below. Please hit us up. We'd love to give you more personalized advice as far as like guys that you should be targeting. We'd love to see your scoring settings to give you the best advice that we can. So guys, please don't be afraid to interact with us so we can give you customized help, because I mean, that's what me and Tad are here for, to help you win your respective fantasy leagues and bring home some fantasy championships. Now, let's go away from the actual overall fantasy IDP talk. Let's actually get to some positions. Let's talk about some, sleepers, any busts that you may have. So, Tad, when you're talking about the defensive line position, who's a sleeper that you have an eye on that could possibly go undrafted, or maybe you'll draft him as like one of your final spots that nobody else will sort of recognize, and you could come away with a potential sleeper?
I'm glad you use the word recognize, because I think if you're kind of like into football, like really following it, you recognize this name. But even me, I was like, I know he's like, okay, I know he's been around for a while, but what really shocked me while I was doing research for this position, he finished as the 10th best defensive lineman last year. And that's Zach Sealer, the D lineman out of Miami. Now, notice how I said D lineman, because Miami likes doing this thing. That's actually really getting more common around the league. You see this a lot with guys like, I know Leonard Williams plays mostly D tackle, but it's not uncommon to see him, lined up at D end next to Kayvon Thibodeau, aka Al Rose, arch nemesis. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's what's his face in Vegas. Anthony Pierce, the Raiders head coach.
Antonio Pierce.
That's Rose arch nemesis. Kayvon is a close second for reasons I don't know. Actually, no, that's not true. Derek Carr is his second. Kayvon's number 3. God, he has a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
Weird dude.
He does.
Anyway, point being is you see this pretty commonly of like kind of hybrid D ends, D tackles. You saw the Rams do that with Aaron Donald before he retired. R.I.P. Aaron Donald. Is he going to be a broadcaster? What's he up to?
I don't think so. I think he's just chilling now.
Good for him. God knows he earned it. But point being is, you saw, and do me a favor while I'm talking, look up how much the contract actually was, because you saw Christian Wilkins sign with the Raiders for, God, I want to say it was like $30 million guaranteed or something. He signed an ungodly contract. I thought it was way too much.
It was more than 30 million guaranteed.
Well, I think it was 30 guaranteed, but like 50 overall. I don't know. You look it up while I'm talking.
I thought it was
well,
way more
yeah.
than
All right, look it up. But point being is Christian Wilkins was so good with the Dolphins because he was kind of bouncing between the D tackle DN positions, and I think Sealer has that ability to do the same for Miami. But here's why I really like him: is again, one, his name you recognize, but not a whole lot of people are like, oh, I need that guy, and two, he is now Christian Wilkins' replacement. He is the guy. They did not draft heavily with defensive line. They did not draft heavily, or they did not really go after a replacement in free agency. So I think that Sealer, they're confident that he can be the Wilkins replacement of like, you are going to be our guy jumping from end to tackle in our starting defense. So I think he's going to get even more reps. And, now that he's not in front of, behind Christian Wilkins, I think that there's a very good chance he breaks top 5 of D linemen. And this is a guy that he may get drafted, but it's going to be late if he does.
Yeah, you're way off.
Oh, God.
How much? 4 years, $110 million contract with the Las Vegas Raiders, including $24 million in signing bonus, $82.75 million in guaranteed money, and an average annual salary of $27.5 million every single year. So,
Raiders fans, I am so sorry. That must just be a miserable existence. That is a dumb contract.
Yeah, so he signed quite a bit.
I don't even think I would pay TJ Watt that much
being
money.
So much higher. I was like, I remember being so much higher than that. I was just like, man, you really think it was that much? But no, he got quite a bit.
Oh my God.
Let's see if it works out for him. I think that's the biggest thing Raiders fans are hoping for sure. There,
it won't. I need time to process. You talk.
Yeah. I'm going to go with my defensive line sleeper here. And this is from the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm going to go with George Karlaftis. So he's entering his third year with the Kansas City Chiefs here. He had 6 sacks in his rookie year in 2022, and then he increased it to 10.5 in 2023. I think just the biggest thing is just seeing improvement year over year in that defense. He's becoming one of their key producers on that defensive line, along with Chris Jones, obviously. They also drafted Felix Unadike Amora last year, I remember. So he's going to be a supplemental piece of that defensive line as well. So I think this guy once again, depending on your scoring settings, I think he has potential to finish in the top 10. He finished as a top 20 defensive lineman last year. But yeah, I think just his improved growth and just, his involvement in that defense, they're trying to chase that 3rd ring in a row. I very much think that he's going to be a critical piece of that defense, that he's just going to keep growing here. And so, yeah, Chiefs led the league, or not led the league, sorry. They were 2nd in the league with 57 sacks last season. And I think with that, Karlaftis can grow further to just be a key force of that pass rush attack. So Karlaftis, I expect to have a big 3rd year.
Now, this is a really good pick by you because last year was one of those weird years, and this is anything profound. A lot of people were saying this, where we actually saw the opposite of the Chiefs narrative kind of happen, where it was usually the Chiefs narrative is, wow, that offense, and all last year was, wow, that defense.
Yeah.
And the big thing is that defense really didn't lose anybody. They didn't lose any key players, so they should, if logic tracks, still be as good. Steve Spagnuolo, is it that he's too old? He's getting like no head coaching opportunities.
I think he had 1 or 2 interviews, but yeah, I think he's probably settled in. So it's like, I have a good thing here with Kansas City. So it's like, I'll just continue getting
exactly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Positive recognition as opposed to his time in New York, right? So
or New York and St. Louis, man. Let me tell you,
St. Louis as well, for sure. But yeah,
he really tied himself to Bradford, poor bastard. But yeah, point being is everyone's still there. And yeah, Karlaftis was, and this doesn't really go into the fancy talk, but just like, yeah, the Raiders paid Wilkins $80 million. That's a sign of a badly run franchise. I remember when Karlaftis was drafted by the Chiefs. At the time, they didn't need an edge rusher. Yeah. And everyone was saying like, well, why would you do that? Because they had the ability to look 3 years down the road and be like, we're going to need one in 3 years. And like you said, he was the perfect player for them at that point. Because at the time of the draft, I was like, if he needs to start right away, he's not going to do shit. But you saw the developmental traits there. It's like, shows how often I've been playing. But it's like CFB 25 when you get that 3-star prospect. It's like 66. And you're just like, hey, it'll be fine. And then you sim 3 years later and he's like 85. And you're like, fuck yeah. Like that is exactly what happened to the Chiefs. So yeah, I expect him. I don't think he's going to be up there and leading the league in sacks, but he'll definitely be knocking on the door of the top 10 in terms of sack numbers, and therefore probably in the top 10 of defensive linemen as well.
Yeah, easily. I can see that happening for sure. All right, Ted, let's move up to the next rank here, the second level of the defense. Let's get to the linebacker. So do you have a sleeper or do you have a bust or just, what are your thoughts of the linebacker position?
Should I close my blinds for this? The sniper is right across the roof. Should I stop making that joke now? Nah, it's okay. He
You've
lived.
done
He
it enough
lived. He
times.
lived. He's fine. God, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this. I'm saying don't draft this man as a linebacker. He will bust for you. You may have heard of him. His name is Micah Parsons. Do not draft Micah Parsons as a linebacker because, damn, I meant to black this out from my notes before I sent it to you. He finished, I was going to quiz you on this. He finished as the 29th ranked linebacker last year. 29th. That means 28 other guys. I'm not good at math, but I'm good enough to do that math. 28 other guys finished higher than Micah Parsons. Now, I know people may be going like, how is that possible? IDP is stupid, blah, 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 because I was kind of saying that same thing when I saw that stat. But when you actually look at his individual stats, it makes a whole hell of a lot more sense, especially because it honestly, gave me a flashback. It's funny how much you forget from an NFL season, because I totally forgot this was a very common complaint happening here in Dallas last year was, and by common, I mean like sports radio, Mike and the Mad Dog level, like screaming. The Cowboys misused Micah Parsons. He is a good linebacker. I am not saying he's a bad player whatsoever. I'm not saying he's overrated. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying as a fantasy player, if the Cowboys continue to use him in the way they did last year, which was primarily as a pass rusher, that's where they went wrong. They very rarely dropped him. He himself even expressed frustration over that of like, I want to drop back in coverage. That's where I thrived as a rookie. And it is. I think they were kind of forced to make him a D end, but that's why as a linebacker, and this is what we were talking about earlier, pay attention where they're kept, because I'm sure if he was listed as a DL, he would have been in a top 10 DL because he had 14 sacks last year. However, you look at the rest of the stats, I think he had like one interception, if I'm correct, but he only finished with 38 tackles. So almost like 30% of his tackles last year came from his sacks. 38 tackles is shit for a linebacker in IDP leagues. Now, you could say, oh, well, you could say this because I just read this article as well where, Micah Parsons recently said Mike Zimmer, new DC in Dallas, is utilizing my versatility well again. I put very little stock into these preseason interviews. Like every year, they're just like, oh, how's that rookie doing? He's doing good. He's doing good. He's progressing well. He's shown some real promise. And then he's cut like 2 weeks later. And it's just like, okay. So yes, I'm sure Mike Zimmer will be smarter with him, but I'll believe it when I see it type of thing. And on top of that, something to note that we noted, I want to say 2 episodes ago, might have been last episode, was Dallas Cowboys second year player, Sam Williams. I think I got that name right.
Yep. Sam Williams.
Out for the season. He was a defensive end, former second round pick. So once again, kind of like what I said, is the Cowboys were forced to make Parsons a D end last year. Edge rush is a big, or really just pass rush in general, is a big weakness of the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm not entirely confident they're not going to do the same thing with Micah Parsons again. And if I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat, that also the less his stats are, the less you can get away with paying him, because that's what they're trying to nickel and dime the shit at like 3 of their superstars right now. So in general, like, go ahead and draft Micah Parsons, but that is a massive buyer beware, sticker on it for me.
I think everything you said makes a ton of sense, but there's definitely going to be somebody that's going to be like, Micah Parsons, he's the best player in the Cowboys. I'm going to draft him. So it's like automatically he's going to be drafted. So it's like, it's hard to say like, don't draft him because somebody's going to draft him. That's for sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, somebody's going to regret it.
They will regret it. I completely agree with you because, I 100% would have been against everything that you said. But the fact that you just said Sam Williams is going to be out for the entire year, which I brought up in that last episode too, is just like, that's a critical factor because, they think they're going to be hogtied into having to use him as more of a pass rusher as opposed to dropping him into coverage. Because also, Tad, in the offseason, they signed Eric Kendricks, who has ties with Mike Zimmer from his time in Minnesota. So it's like, you have to believe that they're probably going to use him as the more traditional linebacker to, rove the middle of the field there and then use Micah Parson on the outside. Now, I am hearing some good things from the rookie Marshawn Nealon that they drafted this year, but once again, just like we talked about, rookie, it could be good, it could be bad. We really just don't know how that's going to be. So when you have a proven, quote unquote proven commodity at rushing the passer and Micah Parsons, I think they'll probably rely on that. That's like, if we're going to get pressure on the opposing quarterback, we have to use Parsons because we don't really have anybody else on our line right now that can consistently do that. And so as much as we don't want to, I think we kind of have to. But yeah, I think in your terms, I think it kind of makes sense that they want to, because yeah, they probably don't want to pay him that much. So it makes a lot of sense there for sure too. But yeah, Micah Parsons, I think, yeah, very much could be one of those players. I think you'll draft him and expect him to be an absolute boom for you. But yeah, he could end up busting for sure. So I could see that. I could see it happening.
It's sure. Kind of compared to how like the Steelers utilize TJ Watt in a very good way. Yeah. Is they primarily use him as a pass rusher, but they still drop him back in coverage enough where he'll get you a pick or two on the season to help out there. But the Cowboys just are not smart enough. And this is why Mike McCarthy needs to be fired. I say it when he was the coach in Green Bay, he's not a good coach, is because I'm fine that they use him primarily as a pass rusher, but the problem is primarily doesn't mean always.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it was basically always. And like I said, that was a huge frustration in Dallas, was everyone was saying, where's Micah Parsons? Because they were getting gashed in the secondary. And by the way, I have a sleeper, supposedly, for defensive back. But if I had to pick a bust, Deron Bland. Yeah, because Deron Bland's overrated. Trevon Diggs is overrated. So they were getting gashed in the secondary. So everybody was saying in Dallas last year, where's Parsons helping us out? And there he is at the line, like doing nothing. It's just, oh, poor Dallas fans. I actually revel in your pain, unlike the Raider fans, but yeah.
Yeah, the biggest thing is just Deron Bland's not going to replicate the same interception return touchdowns that he had last year.
Once in a lifetime season.
So yeah, I completely agree with you. People who are going to overdraft Deron Bland, that's a mistake as well. So for sure. My sleeper for the linebacker position is actually a former Niner that I want to bring up here because he's reuniting with his former defensive coordinator in Houston, and that's Azeez Al-Shaair, who has just signed with the Houston Texans.
He's a Texan.
He is a Texan, so
God damn it.
He is a backup. And Tad, I'm pretty sure you might be familiar with him because he was, he's a former backup with the San Francisco 49ers, but with the emergence, obviously, of Dre Greenlaw, he was just not getting the same playing time. So in the offseason, he left and signed a 1-year deal with the Tennessee Titans, also in your division. So I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this guy. All he did last year, Tad, which I'm pretty sure you might know this, but he had 163 total tackles, which was 5th best in the NFL. He had 84 solo tackles, was tied for 14th best in the NFL. And he had 9 tackles for loss. He also had 4 passes defended and 1 fumble recovery. So, I mean, this guy, when he was given the starting job, like as a leader for that Tennessee Titans defense, like, I mean, he was absolutely killing it. Titans are sort of going in different directions, so he decided to leave. Like I said, he reunited with his former defensive coordinator with the San Francisco 49ers, D'Amico Ryan. So he is now the middle linebacker for the Houston Texans to lead that group there. I very much could see him replicating very similar numbers, if not exceeding them, because I mean, this was one of, I remember when we did our free agency preview episode, I predicted that Devin White would go to the Houston Texans. Or sorry, I think I predicted Patrick Queen to go to the Houston Texans. I predicted one like astounding middle linebacker because I was like, D'Amico Ryans is looking for his Fred Warner to lead this defense because that's what he had obviously in San Francisco. And so I thought it would be a bigger name. They ended up not signing anybody big last year, but then now this year I thought that would happen. But yeah, I think this case, you bring in a guy who's familiar with your system, who's capable very much. We saw that in Tennessee. I think Al-Shaair will be that type of guy here in Houston. He'll just be a rover all over the field. The Texans didn't really have that great production from their middle linebackers last year and their linebacking crew overall. So I think this guy will anchor that linebacker core, make them overall a lot better. And yeah, he'll be able to sort of rove around and be that sort of Fred Warner light, I will say, in D'Amico Ryans' defense that, you know, you will not be happy about. But yeah, because of that, a lot of people may overlook him. But yeah, I think he's going to be a sleeper for sure.
I thought we got rid of him. Damn it. Yeah, I mean, this guy is a 6'2", 230-pound Swiss Army knife. Exactly like what we were talking about with Micah Parsons is he can do everything. Mm-hmm. And this is why I'm really not, because when he was with Tennessee, like you say, he was all over the place, but like Tennessee really didn't do much with it. I honestly would say, man, this might be a bit of a hot take, probably the second best player on the Titans team last year.
Overall, or you're talking about just the defense?
Overall. No, defense, I would say probably first.
For defense, probably first. But yeah, overall, that's a hot take.
Yeah, it's between him and Hopkins for number 2.
Yeah.
But other than that who else am I going to say? Traylon Burks. But no, and another thing is, Mike McDonald gets a lot of love, as he should, justifiably so, for, that system he has and that system he kind of grew and adopted from San Francisco. Wow, you guys really are going to be like the Buffalo Bills of this generation, aren't you? Like really good team, great coaches, but never got the ring. Sorry, buddy. But D'Amico Ryans deserves the same thing, but on the defensive side, and he's not. He gets a lot of love. Don't get me wrong, but
He does.
his defensive schemes are crazy, crazy
Mm-hmm.
good. And like you said, the heart of that defensive scheme is quite almost literally where it is, the heart, which is middle linebacker. Yeah, that's a match made in heaven, and I really don't like it.
Also, it's crazy to see this, Tab, but I don't know how much of the Hall of Fame game that you watched, but they were announcing all the Hall of Fame inductees, and they brought up Andre Johnson. And of course, the Texans and the Bears played in that game. And so the stat that they showed was that they panned to D'Amico Ryans, and they were like, former teammate of Andre Johnson. I was like, man, I feel old. Just like the fact that they were teammates, and now this guy's going to the Hall of Fame, and this guy's coaching, is just like, geez.
Now, if you want to feel really old, ESPN released an article last week of like predicting the next like 20 Hall of Fame classes. I should not have read that.
Yeah, that's an episode for disaster for sure.
It's like seeing like Chris McCaffrey in the 2028 Hall of Fame. Like, oh God.
Yeah. All right, Ted, let's close this out by talking about the secondary here. So who are some secondary guys, defensive backs, safeties, whichever one that you want to list out here, but that you think is a sleeper or potentially a bust this year?
Okay. So, peek behind the curtain for our listeners and viewers. We had a slight discussion before the show about this, but we ended up doing show without, recording. So it was like, we're stopping this. We need to have this discussion on camera. I say he's a sleeper. Yes, he is a known, but he's still a sleeper because even though you're known, like we were talking about earlier, does not mean people are valuing you the way they should. And my sleeper for defensive back is cornerback Kenny Moore. This is where I'm not going to lie, I was between Latu and Moore. I was like, I'm going to talk about one of these guys. I was more confident in Kenny Moore. I was like, Kenny Moore is easier to, put my name on. So Kenny Moore in 3 of the last 4 seasons had 80 tackles as corner. That's why I value corners more than safeties, is because most safeties don't get quite up there. They get around like anywhere from the 50 to 70 range. But if you pick the right slot corner, and that's another reason why I'm picking Kenny Moore, because slot corners have high tackle rates and high interception chances as well. Because also in the last three of the last 4 years, Kenny Moore has had at least 3 interceptions. So he's consistently landing in the top 10 defensive backs that you should target. And here's why I label him as a sleeper, because everyone was making fun of the Colts when they re-signed him to a fairly big contract. I loved it because everyone thinks that means, the Colts think that Kenny Moore is going to be their number 1 corner. No, they don't. I wanted the Colts to take Quinyon Mitchell in the draft because we need a corner. The Colts know that. Apparently, Quinyon Mitchell was also a target of theirs, but they didn't think Latu was going to be there at, 15? So they were like, all right, well, let's go with Latu, which was the right choice. Now I'm just doing a Colts podcast. But point being is I think Kenny Moore is the perfect slot corner that will rack up tackles for you on a fairly consistent basis, get you that 1 interception point, and just is consistent. I don't think he's going to blow the top off for you any week, but he's that tight end where you're just like, he's going to give me, 8 catches a game. If he gets a touchdown, great. But for a tight end, a position that is in constant flux, which corner is, if you ask me, what's the tight end of IDP? I'd probably say corner because there's like every week is just up and down for those guys. So it's top 10 value that I think that people are going to see him as a pedestrian name, and you can get top 10 value for, now you're going to have to draft him. That's the thing, is he's not going to be an undraftable steal. You're going to have to draft him, but I think you can wait on him. I don't think he'll be one of the first 3 or 4 corners taken. And so you're shaking your head. So he is a sleeper.
I'll get to my take. I'll let you finish.
I'm done. You get to your take.
Okay. Now, I will say in the NFL, yes, he's a very underrated sleeper-esque type of player for sure. I don't think a lot of people are talking about Kenny Moore as far as probably one of the, good corners in the league for sure, which I think he's proven that for sure year over year. But in an IDP sense, like I said, I think when you're playing in an IDP league, not as much research goes into IDP, surprisingly, even if you play in an IDP league compared to your offensive roster. Like that's just, unfortunately, there's very few people out there like myself that will do just as much research for IDP players as they will for offensive players. So if you're just playing in an IDP league, even if you played in one for a while, you're going to look at, sort of a fallacy that a lot of people fall into is that they're going to look at last year's projection, or they're going to look at this year's projection, and they're going to look at last year's numbers, and they're going to see that based on the point total, Kenny Moore finished as a top 10 defensive back in both the leagues that I'm in. So once again, depending on the scoring settings that you have, it's just like he's a top 10 defensive back. So yeah, I do agree with you. He's not going to be drafted as a top 3 or top 5 type of defensive back, but people know to draft this guy to be their starting defensive back because he is such a proven commodity over the past couple of years. And so That is the reason why I say he's not a sleeper as much. But like I said, I gave you a pass because you haven't played in IDP leagues as much as I have. So
I'm so sorry. If you are getting cause remember that side I told you the top 3 finishers in last year's, at corner last year were Mike Hilton, Kenny Moore, and Deron Bland. And the Bland thing, I'm actually making a move. I'm putting a message in the LAFB Slack, fancy Slack right now. So that will either backfire on me in the fact that no one will respond in time before the episode is over, or
probably.
that, and this is far more likely, is that they will all disagree with me. But my point being is, if you can get top 3 talent that you didn't draft in the top 5, that's sleeper material by my definition. Like, what the hell is your definition of sleeper? Like, does your sleeper have to go undrafted?
No, my sleeper has to go outside the top 10. That's a definition for me for a sleeper. At the position, I should say.
For me, it's like see, this is an interesting discussion we should have later on. But for me, it's like a sliding scale. Like if I think he's gonna finish top 3 and I get him at like number 6, that's a sleeper in my opinion. But if he falls out of the top 10 and then he finishes in the top 10, also a sleeper. I see. I'm a man of culture. I adjust my expectations. Intolerance is what you are.
I'm gonna get to add actual sleeper pick here.
Oh, fuck you.
I'm going to go with Jair Brown of the San Francisco 49ers. So Talanoa Hufanga, one of their starting safeties, he injured his ACL last year, halfway through the season. And so he's still rehabbing his knee. He's probably going to start the season. Maybe he'll miss the first 2 games and then he'll be back to go. But regardless of that, he's the other safety. So Jair Brown's going to be the other starting safety opposite of Talanoa Hufanga. The biggest thing is that Tashawn Gibson, who was the former starting safety for the San Francisco 49ers, he's no longer with the team. And even if he was with the team, he's serving a 6-game suspension because of PED suspicion. So he's not with the team anymore. But the biggest thing that Jair Brown has for him is that in the times that he started for the 49ers, he started 7 games for them last season, including the NFC title game as well as the Super Bowl. In those 7 starts combined, he had 31 solo tackles, 2 passes defended, and 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions came in the Super Bowl along with 7 of those solo tackles. So, I mean, in the Super Bowl, as a rookie, he came out and he performed at his best. So heading into this year, he has claimed that other starting safety spot. And I think with sort of like, the possibility of Talanoa Hufanga probably easing into the season if he doesn't start right away, I can see Jair Brown sort of being used as more as like that roving safety, that guy who can come into the box as well as defend on the back end as well. So because of that, I think a lot of people are not going to be seeing Jair Brown as like a big name to be drafting. He very well will go undrafted in most IDP leagues. But I think because of just the talent that he has around him and just he's going to develop further in his second year, Jair Brown could definitely be a steal.
Chauncey responded in the Slack, but we're not going to share his answer because it contradicts what I'm saying.
Of course not. I can take the answer, though.
No, it's okay. You don't need to. We're doing show right now. Get off your phone. I'm in teacher mode. No phones while recording. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to this. I just got to trust you because, I never heard of this guy, which also begs the question. Stop smiling. Which begs the question. Jair Brown out of
Penn State.
Okay. I knew you know that, but here's where I'm going to be truly impressed. Where'd he go before Penn State?
Where'd he go before Penn State? That's a good
2018, question. 2019, he went to a college.
That's good. He went to college.
I assume.
That one you got me. I really have no idea.
He was, hold on, let me look up their mascot. Let's see. Oh, it's in Scranton, apparently.
Oh, interesting.
And Wikipedia does not have their mascot at Lackawanna College.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
Okay.
But yeah,
I mean, college, or is that actual?
Lackawanna College is a private college in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It also has satellite centers in Hazleton, Hawley, Sunbury, Towanda, and oh my God, good God, Tunkhannock.
I have no idea what you're looking at.
I did not know there were so many Native American names in Pennsylvania. Jesus Christ. Yeah, sorry, bud. Just don't have much to add. I've never heard of this guy until about roughly 45 minutes ago. But I will say this is like the 49ers churn out corners like no other. You guys churn out defensive linemen and corners. Like look at Travarius. How you say it?
Charvarius, yeah.
Yeah, he's killing it. And is he still in Kansas City?
No, he's
with you guys. But the point being is like if it's a San Francisco corner, you've been pretty strong there when you're not hurt for the last like better half of a decade.
Former TCU home frog, Jason Barrett. He had that one season.
I'm just shaking my head because he could have been a Hall of Famer.
He could have been so good. Yeah, believe me. That one season that I saw him in San Francisco, I was like, dude, this guy is legit.
I almost said San Diego, but yeah,
he got crippled by the injury bug so badly. Like he's one of those players. Like you see sometimes on social media, it's like, what player do you think would have had the best career if they didn't get hurt? It's like he'd be in that list. 100%.
He is my Terrell Davis. Like truly, like he would. I absolutely. I'm not being a homer when I say that. I absolutely believe Verrett would have been like a borderline Hall of Fame corner.
Yeah, no, the guy was amazing. The guy was amazing.
But point being is, San Francisco knows good corner talent, so they get the Lackawanna alum to fill in there, and yeah, definitely a name I'll be keeping my eye on. How's D Winters doing, by the way?
He's been killing it in preseason. I've seen some of his videos. Yeah, D Winters have been looking pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. D Winters have been looking pretty good. But yeah, so that will close out our IDP episode. I kind of already did a midway through the episode plug, but I mean, I'm going to plug it again, guys. If you're playing in IDP leagues and you need some specific advice, because like I said, depending on the IDP league that you play in, you could have different roster settings, you could have different scoring settings. So, I mean, the way you approach your IDP drafting could be a lot different league to league. So, I mean, guys, hit us up. We'd love to give you individual advice. So, you see our ticker right down below. You got us on Twitter. You got me at Over the Side 23, the Tad Side 94. You got the show handle at the Decide Guys, and of course on Instagram at the Decide Guys as well. So, I mean, guys, interact with us. We'd love to give you, like I said, specific advice for the league that you're in, whether you're playing an IDP league or a non-IDP league, whatever it is. Like I said, we want to help you win championships. We want to help you win your respective fantasy leagues. Please subscribe to our podcast. That's the best way you can stay up to date with all of our fantasy advice and all of our fantasy episodes as we lead into the season. Less than a month away, Tad. We're almost there. It's going to happen.
We're in August.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, so you're up to date with our videos. We've got a lot of great content as well. And please support our Paradox LAFB network, because they're giving you a lot of great content when it comes to the Rams and the Chargers at the professional level, and the Bruins and the Trojans at the college level. So, I mean, guys, they're giving a lot of great content with all 4 LA football teams. And guys, to everybody who's already interacting with us on social media, who's watching the videos, who's listening to the podcast, who's interacting with us, I mean, just guys, anything and everything that you're doing to support the podcast, we cannot thank you enough.
And I see this happen a lot with my students where, my smartest student will be struggling on a particular lesson one day, and they know they're one of my smartest students, and they don't want to lose that reputation. And so they won't ask the question that I need them to ask, because I need them to understand that. And like Amir said, unless you're in one of our leagues, I want you to win your league. So if you kind of are like very full of yourself, shouldn't say full of yourself, if you're a very confident person and you're like, I know everything except for that one thing, but I don't want to ask, shoot us over something, DM us on Instagram is probably the best way to do that.
And I think that's that common expression too, where it's like, don't be afraid to ask a question, but I'm pretty sure there's 5 other people in the room with you that has the same question.
Again, as a teacher, that's literally, you physically see that where, someone will finally ask it and you see heads going like, yeah, what the fuck is that about? Which unfortunately, yes, 8th graders do talk like that. But that's basically the whole purpose. We're doing a Fantasy 101 series, which I believe is coming next week.
It's coming pretty soon.
Yeah, it's coming soon.
Ironed out exactly when it's going to be starting, but yeah, coming soon.
We got to hire a trailer guy. Coming soon. So yeah, send in your questions. We'll feature it. We won't feature your name if you don't want us to, but we'll feature it. We'll touch on that issue. If you don't want us to feature it on the show, then that's fine too. We'll help you in the DMs as well. So bottom line being is, if you need help setting up your league, if you need help winning your league, if you need help drafting in your league, now is the time, because like Amir said, we're basically I would say most drafts are going to start kicking off in about 2 weeks. My league likes to start drafting a little later. We usually wait until the day before the season starts. But I feel like a lot of leagues usually aim for that 3rd week of preseason. So you only have a little bit of time. So if you have any questions, no matter how dumb, how simple it may seem, send them in, because we want to help you and we need material to work with as well. So keep an eye out for that 101 series. That's coming soon. Keep an eye out for draft advice shows. I'm sure that's down the pipeline. If you're a college football guy, we got some material there coming as well. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming in August. Keep tuning in. Keep watching on YouTube. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this one. Thank you so much for watching this one. And please stay safe, everyone.